They Shall Not Grow Old is a remarkable new documentary made by Peter Jackson as part of 1418 Now, the UK arts programme marking 100 years since the end of the First World War. The Oscar-winning director restored and colourised First World War footage from the Imperial War Museum. He added a soundtrack and he created the entire project in 3D. He produced an incredible film that brings the war to life in a way that I've never seen before. Pete Jackson, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
At the end of this remarkable film, you talk about your great-grandfather, your grandfather?
Grandfather.
Tell me about him.
I tell you what I can. I never met him. He died in 1940 of his wounds from the war. I mean, by 1930, when my dad was 10 years old, he had to carry him up the stairs because he was incapacitated and he was very, very disabled. He was in the British Army from 1910 to and he was discharged medically unfit in 1919. I think he actually wanted to stay a soldier, but he was too stuffed to actually. They wouldn't let him stay any longer.
New Zealand Division or
no, he was the South Wales Border, second division.
Yeah.
So a second battalion, South Wales Borders. He fought. He was in Tsingtao in China in 1914. Went to Gallipoli, landed on the 25th of April, won a DCM, Suvla Bay in the Scimitar Hill Valley, part of Gallipoli. Went to the Somme, hit by a German machine gunner on the first day of the Somme. Had to go back to England to be patched up. Met my grandmother. Got married. So I actually owe my existence to that German machine gunner. Just wanted to see ironies of these war. I think he was hit by a German machine gun. It's so bad. Well, actually, from my point of view, it's not really too bad at all. But he was patched up and went back again for all the Passchendaele and all the rest of it. So he was in the whole war. I don't know. I'd love to know how many guys from 1914 survived to the end of the war. I've never actually read that figure anywhere in a book. Have you?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. One of my passion projects is to work out how many people. And I think if you work out who won the 1914 Star, because apparently it's quite difficult to work out.
Oh, you have to go through all the medal cards and count them all.
Apparently that might be the way
manually.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he fought. He was one of the first British soldiers to go into action because they were with the Japanese attacking Tsingtao in China, and that was like one of the first engagements of the war. Yeah.
I mean that's a fascinating question, and I think the last Brit to be killed. Ellison, is it? He was in 1914. He was non-contemptible as well. So he fought all the way through. It's extraordinary.
And even if you took a battalion like the 2nd Battalion South Wales Borders, I've always want to know how many of those were, of the 1914 guys were there at the end. But I just don't know how you find that stuff. You just manually go through all the medal cards.
But one day that's a project I would love to do. And the other project I'd love to do, you mentioned is very interesting.
I'll join you. You and I can sit together. I'll happily go through all the medal cards and we'll just count.
We'll do it.
We'll just have a little clicker. We'll count together. Yeah.
Well, the other one that your grandfather also fits into nicely. I was talking to the University of Birmingham the other day, a project looking at casualties post-First World War that can be attributed to wartime. So the guys like your grandfather who don't appear on any rolls of honour, he survived, right? Yeah. But his life was destructive.
He got some incredible sort of, I don't know, Dad always called it sort of, some extreme arthritis or something, but he always said that my grandfather just said it was due to being in the trenches up to his waist in water for a long time. I mean, because I think he was up to his waist in water in Tsingtao in China, and then I think it happened in Passchendaele and God knows where else it did. I mean, and he put his ill health down to being up to his waist in water a lot of the time.
Well, and the amount of successful veterans you see who ended up drinking themselves to death, and psychological casualties,
all that sort of stuff. Yeah,
you wonder.
Well, that would be a much harder count to do. Yeah. I don't know how you do that. I suppose you look at the pension.
And we thought one idea is looking at coroner's records.
Coroner's record,
Well, that speaking of up to that and mud, I thought your film is so remarkable because it felt to me like someone who loves and loves is the wrong word, but someone who is fascinated by the First World War and just wants to make sure there is as much content in there as possible. Because you're sitting there and it's like, right, we're going to do sex, we're going to do food, we're going to do rats, we're going to do effect. You got everything in there, and I was amazed. There's no downtime in that film.
We were in conditions that isolated us completely from civilization. We got so degenerate, so isolated, living in this mud.
And you could sympathise with how a rabbit must feel because we were hunted by mankind, just the same as a rabbit.
You knew your lives were in one another's hands and it united you very closely and you didn't let anything interfere with that.
You knew what was going on within your vision. Beyond that, you hadn't got a clue.
You didn't care how the war was going, whether you were winning. You weren't bothered with that at all. You lived like tramps. You didn't polish any buttons. You wore any uniform bits that you liked, and nobody worried. All they were concerned with was that you were fit to fight.
No, and there's not enough of what it should be. I mean, I was sort of at the, I thought, God, I don't really have enough on gas, because gas was a big thing that I could only end up putting a tiny little bit. I mean, some of it is very underrepresented. It's not necessarily the proportions of it are not quite kind of right. But anyway, I tried to. But there's also a lot of stuff that's not in there because I couldn't. I had to sort of focus on something, and so there's no Royal Flying Corps, there's no Navy, there's no Home War, there's no women in the factories, armaments. There's so many great First World War stories that just there's not because it just ended up being I could do a little bit of everything, or I could just focus on one thing, and so because of the film material and the audio material, I just thought, well, look, it's a British soldier's experience in the Western Front because it doesn't talk about any other of the front. It doesn't talk about the Palestine or Gallipoli or anything else either. It's a little fraction.
Well, you say that. I mean, if you showed that film for someone with a standing start, they would have a pretty good idea of the Western Front for sure. But I mean, it's the way that you deliberately try to. It's like a machine. It's staccato, isn't it? There's a lot of different aspects of life. There's fighting, there's living, there's rest, quote unquote.
If nothing's happened, you chat about life, where he came from, where you came from. Everything was friendly. There was a terrific lot of kindness in a way to each person.
When the war was not very active, it was really rather fun to be in the front line. It was not very dangerous, a sort of out-of-door camping holiday with the boys, with a slight spice of danger to make it interesting.
Did you have a kind of list of things you wanted to get in there?
Not really. I mean, I understand. I've been interested in the First World War, so I sort of on one level knew what the topics all were. But the practical thing is, I had these audio recordings, and I asked for them to find me audio recordings where the guys are not too old. I didn't really want the narration to be done by 98-year-old men. So we got a lot of I'm not sure we got all of them, but we got a lot of the BBC Great War recordings that they'd done, which was only, we've only ever heard a tiny fraction. And the IWM had quite a few recordings from the 60s and 70s as well. And I didn't really, I might have used the odd occasional 1980s recording, but not much. Most of it, the guys are not much older than me. Very young.
Prime of life.
And that was deliberate. I really didn't want old voices, shaky old men to be telling the story. I wanted as young as I could find. But going back earlier than the 1960s, there's pretty thin. There's not a hell of a lot of recordings of people of any great note. But some of the stuff in the 60s is like 10 hours of recordings of one guy. So I got 600 hours worth of audio recording and I don't know, hundreds of different guys. There's 120 different guys in our story. And so what it really was one continual narrative, collective narrative that's told by 120 different men who sound like they're all telling the same story, because I wanted it to be the common story. So if anyone was telling goes off on a tangent, telling one particular story about their experience, I didn't use it. I sort of only really used ones that stories and descriptions and anecdotes that I thought were sort of, generalised, would be shared by a whole bunch of people. I didn't want to sort of make it about extreme stories, just the common average story,
When I was watching your film, I thought, we are engaged in this extraordinary experiment, this revolution, which began with moving archive and collecting audio. And we don't know yet what the effect of filming those battles is going to be. So when school kids today look at the Battle of Trafalgar, it might as well be the Battle of Thermopylae. It's gone, it's dead, it's in paintings, it's finished. Do you think that kids born after my kids born after any First World War veterans are alive, they will watch your stuff, and do you think it will seem immediate and it will be tangibly different now to any war that's gone before?
Well, I tried to make the film immediate. That was the whole point of restoring the footage and turning it into colour. Because when we did the restoration test at the very beginning, I didn't know what film I was making. I just thought, well, let's see what this stuff looks like when it's restored with all the computer firepower we got. And when I saw those results, just did a few minutes, and the thing that just stood out is the humanity of these guys, their faces, their expressions. They suddenly didn't become, they stopped being cliches and become humans. So that then led me to think, well, this has got to be the human story. It was actually one thing led to the next, to the next, to the next. It sort of made itself in a way. It's formed itself. I didn't have any great, vision for what it was going to be at the start. I didn't really know, I didn't have a clue, but I just sort of did one thing after the other, and it sort of, each thing led to the next. So I hope that I have made something that kids can see today and actually feel a bit more connected to it. Because it is like, there's no doubt that jerky old black and white film through a young eye is, I'm sure there's just zone out. I mean, even I zone out if I'm going through a museum, and they're running a loop of footage. I don't sort of pause and stare at it all the time. It's almost like it doesn't invite you in a weird way. It doesn't invite you to stop and think about it and study it. It's strangely disassociating. And but with this restoration, it doesn't do that anymore. You just watch, you stare at it. I've shown some of this restoration stuff, not necessarily even the stuff in the film, because we've done we've restored 100 hours. I've shown it to historians who've cried when they see it. You just think something different. So I hope that kids, and I didn't make the film for kids necessarily. I wasn't even what I was thinking about, even though it's part of the agenda of what these guys are doing. I do think it's hopefully young people will see the First World War and connect with it a little bit more.
And that's amazing, because that means in 200-300 years' time, the First World War will still be it will still have the impact it has for us, our generation.
Well, imagine if there were audio recordings of Trafalgar veterans. That would be pretty interesting, wouldn't it?
You say imagine. I spend most of my daylight hours thinking about that.
I know.
Dreaming of having a drone over the Battle of Trafalgar.
Oh, it drives me nuts too. I'm thinking of the First World War, and I'm thinking, well, were any Waterloo veterans alive? And no, they weren't. But they weren't did that long. Was there any old shaky old wax disc recording that anyone did of a Waterloo veteran at the end of their lives? Do with that? Because you think, well, that was technically kind of possible, but it probably never happened. But I know it's interesting, isn't it?
But you are one of the few men alive who could recreate the Battle of Trafalgar from a drone's eye view. So I just want to plant that one there. We'll come back to that. So why the First World War for you? Is it the family connection? Is it just the the scale of the drama? What is it?
Well, I've been interested in it since I was a kid, and that's because my dad was interested in it, and I'm an only child, and my dad was interested because of his father. And in the 60s, when I grew up, there wasn't a great industry of books like there is today. There was books coming out, but they were relatively rare. And so every time there was a First World War book published, Dad would go out and buy it. And so our bookshelf at home sort of had this amount of books, First World War books in it, and other history books too, because Dad was a history buff. So only child, I'd sit there and I'd pull a book off the shelf and read it, and then my dad would tell me stories about his father, my grandfather, and it was kind of, and the weird thing is, my dad would talk a lot about Gallipoli, where my grandfather was. And it was a slightly disassociating when I was really young, when I was 6 or 7 or 8 years. I couldn't quite figure it out, because this country I was in New Zealand, that Gallipoli was a huge thing for them. And then it took me a while to separate my grandfather from the Anzacs. I didn't quite get that for a while. And then eventually over time, I understood that New Zealand has a whole different relationship to Gallipoli than what my grandfather, being in the British Army, because, But the other thing is interesting too. The other thing is because my dad immigrated to New Zealand after the Second World War. He was in the British Army in the Second World War. Immigrated in 1946 or something, like a lot of British servicemen did, to different parts of the Commonwealth. And my mum, he hadn't met my mum in Britain. She was in Britain too, but she went out to New Zealand after the Second World War as well, and they both met over there and eventually had me. But anyway, I asked Dad once, he's long since dead now, but I did ask him once. I said, well, what, of all the countries that you could have chosen at the end of the Second World War, why did you come here to New Zealand? Because he had never been there before. He didn't have any relations, even no connection with it at all. And he could have gone to Australia, could have gone to South Africa. And he said, well, he only came to New Zealand because of his father had spoken in glowing terms of the New Zealand soldiers that he'd fought alongside. So then studying the South Wales borderers, I realised that they South Wales borderers and the Wellington Battalion in the New Zealand Army fought side by side in the Battle of Krithia in Gallipoli, and then they fought side by side again in Passchendaele, and I think in Lurkanwar actually, the South Wales borderers were with the Kiwis. So there was at least 3 places I found, there might be more, where the New Zealanders and the South Wales borderers were right side by side, and apparently my grandfather was incredibly impressed by the way that the New Zealanders fought, and my dad always remembered the way in which my grandfather spoke about the Kiwis, and so that's why he chose New Zealand, and so therefore that's why he met my mum there, and that's why I exist today.
Isn't it funny? Both your family and my family as well. The wars continue to reverberate. I mean, our lives are shaped by what the decisions that were made and the things that happened 100 years ago.
Probably a lot of more lives are, and most people don't know it, I think. Again, I mean, my grandfather was hit by a machine gun on the first day of the Somme, and he went back to England to be patched up and met my grandmother, and therefore they got married and had my father. So all these random things happen, and some of them are about the accuracy of a German machine gunner. If he missed my grandfather, then I probably wouldn't exist, and so I'm quite grateful to him as well.
Well, and there's lots of your fans who are extremely grateful as well. Speaking of your fans, we need you to make a big historical epic. Is there anything on that you can tell me? Is there anything that you're doing? We need you.
No. I mean, I'm interested in history, but I haven't had a huge desire to make a First World War film, even though it's my general interest. Because I haven't wanted to my day job and my private interest to actually coincide. Because I think my private interest will no longer be my private interest; it'll be my day job, and it'll be kind of just like everything else. So I've actually been quite protective of that. I've deliberately steered away from any First World War film, but this was a bit different. This was actually, I'm not dressing up guys in uniforms and going out and pretending to be soldiers and shooting stuff. This is all real, so it's sort of different.
So in terms of your private interest, tell me briefly about your remarkable aviation collection, because I kind of stumbled across it.
Growing up with this interest in the First World War and hearing about my granddad and everything else, I've no flying connections in my family, but I started to buy airfix kits when I was 10 years old and stuff, and I started to buy the aeroplanes, interested, and then I just started to read books then about the aces and I became really captivated by the flying story. And then when I got older and had a sort of income that would allow me to actually make planes, I started to make aircraft. I've got about 50 or 60 of them now. Plus I bought a lot of original First World War planes over the years. Got about 10 of those original ones too. So, and I just, it's an airfix kit builder gone mad, really.
Well, is that, or is your own personal Air Force, whichever?
Well, I've got a bigger Air Force than the New Zealand government. Every time I meet the Prime Minister or anyone else, I'd always remind them that my Air Force is bigger, and if they ever get invaded by the Australians or something, my Sopwith Camels will be at their disposal.
That's brilliant. Very good ground attack platform. It's nice and slow. And also tell me about your remarkable installation in Wellington, because for the First World War, which sadly is, if you're listening to this in New Zealand, you will not be able to go and see for much longer. But it was one of the great World War I commemorations.
Well, it was. I've done a lot of things for the centenary. I mean, I've never got paid for any of it. I've always refused. I wanted to do this all for free, and and as a result, I've never worked harder in my life for so little reward than the First World than the centenary. I've been all these projects have been for some reason more difficult than anything else I've ever done in my life. But I've done this. We did this exhibition. I did this trench thing with Pepper's Ghosts and for a Gallipoli trench, and then I do things like dress up 200 New Zealand soldiers in First World War uniforms for marches, and I've got tanks that go out for various parades. So New Zealand's done pretty well. They can turn to me and they can have tanks and planes flying over and soldiers. We're pretty well kitted out, and we've used all that stuff in our centenary, and this is obviously one of them too. But it's but I just figure, well, I'm not going to be alive for the second 200 centenary, so I may as well.
Well, it's the same appropriate, right? Vast expense for little reward. I mean, it feels
it's fine. And actually, to be honest, I wake up in the morning looking forward to doing this. Whereas, if I'm doing some other film, it's like, oh God, it's hard work. This is not none of it. I mean, I've been working hard, but I've enjoyed every second of it, really.
And how can people watch this remarkable film?
I'm hoping if people like it, it'll actually get a wider distribution. I mean, it's sort of between the 16th of October when it's got a multicast, a multi-screening in cinemas around the UK one night only. Then it screens on the BBC on the 11th of November, and I'm hoping that somehow there'll be some sort of public demand that will actually get a few more screenings before so I think once it's the BBC, it'll be all over. So, as far as cinema screenings are, so I'm hoping it might get a few more cinema screenings. Because I think it's good to see it in the cinema.
I think it deserves it. Yeah, it needs to be on a big screen. Thank you very much. We're in the Imperial War Museum now, who you collaborated closely with. I'm going downstairs to buy my daughter an Airfix model Spitfire for her birthday.
How about a World War One?
You know what? That would be more appropriate.
But they're quite hard to make. So no.
Actually, you know what? The wings are a nightmare.
They are a nightmare. Even when I was a kid, they were a nightmare.
On that note, though, because you've got bits of the Red Baron's aircraft, haven't you?
Yeah, quite a few bits, yeah.
Yeah. Now, because that just got torn apart the minute it crashed, didn't it?
Well, and the reason why it crashed in the Australian sector And the Australians, as you know, were the most avid souvenir hunters of the entire war, like sort of scavenging, you know, like a pack of seagulls just walked in, and suddenly it was a strip bare. Yeah, but most of the Richtofen artifacts you find come via Australia. That's where they all ended up.
And so you've accumulated. The bits of it still come on sale? Or?
Occasionally, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of fake stuff. I mean, but I've got one of the crosses from the fuselage. I've got both breeches of both of those machine guns. One of the firing pins is sort of bent and broken, because there was always a rumour that he was struggling with one of his guns, which is why he wasn't paying attention. I think, which is interesting, because one of the firing pins is actually kind of stuffed on one of these gun blocks. You know, I've got like the two gun blocks. I've got a few bits of fabric and stuff. You know. Brilliant. Yeah.
Well, Peter, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.